What is the creepiest unsolved crime you've ever heard of? Lori Erica Kennedy. Seriously, Google her. Creepy as shit. Basically, a woman believed to be from Pacific Northwest stole a birth certificate and started a new life. But there is absolutely zero account or evidence of her before 1988. She actually married and had a baby before killing herself post-divorce in 2010, which was when her ex-husband found the birth certificate and name change documents buried in her closet. The only theory I've seen that's remotely plausible is that she's escaped from the FLDS community. It could explain that she never did have her own birth certificate, and more than one person's pointed out a similar between her and an FLDS prophet family that got into some serious trouble in the 80s. The Sauder children. On December 24, 1945, Jenny Sauder, mother of 9 children, went to bed in their family home in Fayetteville, West Virginia. Some of them were allowed to stay up while she did so, and she fell asleep. She was awakened at midnight by a phone call, and a woman's voice asked if someone Jenny did not recognize was there. Then it just laughed and hung up. She also reported hearing noise on the roof. After having fallen asleep again, she woke up in the early hours of the morning to the smell of smoke, finding the house on fire. She and her husband managed to rescue 4 of the children, but when looking for their ladder, the husband found it missing, and none of the family trucks were working to go get help with. 5 children went missing, and thought apparently bones and organs were found in the ashes of the house. They were deemed by a coroner to belong to an animal. Then, Mrs. Sauder received a letter postmarked from Kentucky in 1968 that contained a picture of a young man with Louis Sauder, I love brother Frankie, Lil Boys, A90132 or 35. Written on the back. The family still believes their children were kidnapped and possibly taken to Italy, as I recall. The family have moved from there to the US years previously. A body was found on Somerton Beach, dead and propped up against a seawall. There was no obvious cause of death. The man had no identification. No one claimed the body, and he matched no missing person's description. In the 40s, this wasn't completely unheard of, so it wasn't big news. But then, the case got weird. In tracing his path based on the train bus tickets they found in his pockets, they discovered his suitcase, which also had no identification. In fact, labels were cut out of the clothes. It wasn't that someone lifted his wallet when they found his body. He'd purposely hidden his identity ahead of time. A second examination of the body revealed a tightly rolled up piece of paper with the words, Tamam Shud. It was loosely translated to, "It is ended," hidden in a watch pocket of his pants. Someone came forward with a copy of a popular poetry book that they have found in the backseat of their car near where the body was found, and the last page, which should have contained the words Tamam Shud, was torn out. Except when police tried to trace this version of the book. It was one that's never been printed anywhere. Although the book was popular, the typeset, size, and shape of this copy was completely unique in the world. The back of the book had a mysterious code written in it, 2 phone numbers. Actually, it had been written on and then torn out the back page, but the indents were still visible on the back cover. One number was a bank. The other was a nurse who lived blocks away from the beach. The nurse insisted she does not know the man, but when shown the body, detectives agree she clearly appeared to recognize him. The nurse had been an army nurse during the war and had been known to give copies of the poetry book away to other men, one in particular, an army intelligence officer. The nurse's identity was kept secret for many years, but within the past year her children have come forward and said she confided to them to see she did know the man, but never gave or said any details on how, and that she was a spy during the war. The code written in the book was never cracked, even though virtually every code breaker in the world, amateur and professional, for the past 60 years has given it a go. Oh, and that poetry book, the Rubaiyat? Another copy of it, also completely unique in the world. Its title page said it was the 7th edition, but the publishing house had only printed 5 editions of it. Was also linked to another mysterious death of a high-ranking government official. He was found dead in a park with the book open on his chest. A woman who testified at the inquest of his death was found dead in her bathtub, wrist slit open. And guess who frequented the hotel bar across the street from the park he was found in, and had given a copy of the book to another man there 2 months before he died? The nurse. The article link gives a much more thorough explanation with a few weird theories. Highly recommend checking it out. Such a creepy case. A childhood friend of mine, who I'll call Gene, was the only son of an immigrant couple. They had him in his later years, so he lived a completely sheltered life and had a complete lack of social skills and social development. They had no other family around, only friends, mostly other immigrants from the same country. Gene's father was very well off, but he did not live like that. So, Gene grew up thinking they were middle class, bordering on poor. When Gene was in his 30s, I think, his father passed away from an illness. Shortly after that, his mother was tragically struck by a vehicle and killed as she crossed a busy street. So Gene was left all alone and in charge of a fortune of assets he was ill-prepared to handle. Out of nowhere, a relative from the old country appeared. She was a young, attractive woman, supposedly a distant cousin. Soon, she was seen with Gene here and there, not too often, but often enough that some people took notice. 3 months later, Gene simply vanished. No one knows where he went or why he hasn't been around, and now the cousin had control of the fortune. Another friend of the family got concerned and called the local police to report him as missing. The guy in charge told the friend to never inquire about Gene, to better leave this matter alone. No one knows what happened to Gene, but several of us have some guesses. Last year, on July 6, my grandparents' aunt and uncle set out for their little round country vacation. Usually, it's just my grandparents, but my aunt and uncle went with them too. I believe it had something to do with their anniversary coming up. Anyways, they go to Colorado and their camper was having some mechanical issues, so they pulled over and called someone to come help. They weren't too far away from the natural park Mesa Verde, so my aunt and uncle decided to go for a hike a little bit. My aunt wasn't really in the best shape at the time. I'm not even going to sugarcoat it. She was overweight and had some medical issues. They got to a smaller trail off one of the main trails, and my uncle, being the nature lover he was, wanted to go down the trail. My aunt did not want to. She did not think it was smart in her condition, so he set off by himself. Keep in mind, this trail would have taken a seasoned hiker 1 hour to finish, so my aunt waits around the end of the trail, and my uncle never came out of that trail. Most people would say, oh, it's a natural trail. Maybe something happened and he fell or got attacked by a wild animal. Nope. They sent out search parties, search dogs, helicopters, and they found nothing. The dogs followed his scent for a while, then out of nowhere it disappeared. The weird part is that a few miles away on a completely different trail, there was a family that claimed to have seen my uncle, but unless he had been gone back to the main trail, there was no way he could have gotten there. They stopped the search after a few days, and my uncle has not been found yet, so the family has sort of just accepted the fate that he's probably no longer with us. But it's hard to move on while wondering what the hell happened. Where's his body? How did those people see him? They were not even near us when he disappeared. None of it makes sense. William and his wife Margaret Patterson left their home at 3000 Piedmont Avenue on the night of March 5th, 1957, or possibly earlier the next morning, without any indication that they intended to be away more than a few hours. The house was found in disarray, the dishes unwashed, underwear, and a pair of Mrs. Patterson's stockings on a bed, and the other indications that the Pattersons did not know they were leaving for a long time. Tommy, the yellow and white cat that was Miss Patterson's most precious possession, was also left behind. Their automobiles left in their house, and there was no signs of a struggle. Associates of the Pattersons told authorities in the 1950s that the couple left to go to an extended vacation to Florida, and later that they sent word that they weren't coming back. A friend of the Pattersons reported the couple missing August 15th, 1957, 5 months after they were last seen in El Paso. A neighbor stated that she was at the Pattersons' home the night they disappeared, and that Miss Patterson seemed very upset, and Mr. Patterson seemed unhappy that the neighbor was there. The neighbor also noted unusual activity at the Pattersons later that night. El Paso authorities convened a rare court of inquiry, also known as an inquest, to look into the couple's whereabouts, but the inquiry failed to find them. The Pattersons owned Patterson Photo Supply near downtown. Patterson also owned an interest in a high-end boat company. The property was located in Mexico. The house, a boat, and a Cadillac. Associates told police that William Patterson had sent written instructions on how he wanted to dispose of his business and private properties. A letter signed W.D. Patterson stated that Patterson wanted his properties to be distributed among Doyle, D.G. Kirkland, and a friend and manager of Duffy's Photo Supply Store, his business auditor, and an employee of the Patterson who was 24 at the time. It was unusual for Patterson to leave his property to those people, considering he had at least 2 living relatives at the time, his father and his sister. Kirkland was the last person who was at the Patterson house before the couple vanished. He was helping Patterson work on his boat in the garage at the house. Several sightings of the couple were reported in Mexico and the United States, but sheriff officials were never able to confirm any of them. The case was reopened in 1984 when an undocumented worker who was hired to clean the home after the Pattersons vanished said he saw blood under and around the water heater in the garage, and a piece of human scalp on the propeller of Patterson's boat. He found a pair of jeans with a Rolex watch that belonged to Patterson, and said he also saw one of Patterson's associates remove bloody sheets from the home and put them inside of a trunk of a car. He did not talk to the police sooner because he was an illegal immigrant at the time. I live next to a trailer that's for rent. When my house was built, someone placed a trailer right on the edge of the property line, so it's unusually close to my bedroom window. There was a period of months where it was empty, save a blue light in the back bedroom. One night, curiosity got the better of me, and I went and peeked in the window. It was a TV that was left on and was on default input screen. The freaky part was the entire floor was covered in plastic, and the place had been cleaned out except for a freaky looking doll that was on the bed. The night after I looked, I woke up with a blue light on my TV in my bedroom. This was really strange because I've turned off the TV and never went to the input screen on my TV. I got up and turned on some lights and made a drink, and then made my way back to the bedroom to try to get back to bed. I could not help but glance over at the trailer and saw the blue light shining as it's always doing. The next night, after at least 3 months of constantly being on, the blue light disappeared and never returned. Crazy coincidence? Probably, but still freaky. Now, that all happened years ago. 3 other people have come and gone since, and the last moved out probably 9 months ago. It had snowed one night, and my girlfriend noticed tracks leading across my yard to the trailer. This was weird, as no one lived there or had even checked on it in months. There was trash that sat on the porch and a flyer of the doorknob that has never moved. I went out with the flashlight and saw a strange set of tracks that came almost directly from the front porch. The only reason I couldn't say for sure is because some of the snow on the porch had melted, but it was a straight line with no other tracks anywhere else. The tracks were of one large boot. Yes, just one. They went from the porch, across my yard, and right up to the 10 feet away from my bedroom window. Then they stopped. There were no return tracks and there was only a right foot. I studied those tracks for hours and cannot figure any of it out. I even had a security camera pointed almost exactly where the tracks are because I've had some theft from my carport. I rewatched the tape and saw nothing because they conveniently ended about 3 inches off of the camera. I had my girlfriend stand on the track and wave her arms out. I could barely see her hands, so it was really close, but there was nothing. I still can't figure out why there was only 1 foot. Why would someone come and stand facing my bedroom, stop, and how someone could retrace a single footsteps backwards? Also, the stride of the step was very large. I will entertain any plausible explanation. In June 1989, the quiet Vancouver, British Columbia suburb of Richmond was shocked when a body was found lying in the yard of an abandoned house. The victim was a 44-year-old nurse named Cindy James. She had been drugged, strangled, and her hands and feet had been tied behind her back. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police believed her death was either an accident or a suicide. In the 7 years before she died, Cindy reportedly had nearly 100 incidents of harassment beginning 4 months after she left her husband. 5 were violent physical attacks, while others were whisperings to silent phone calls. This got worse after she got police involved. At night, she heard prowlers. Her porch lights were smashed and her phone line severed. According to her friend, Agnes Woodcock, she said bizarre notes began to appear on her doorstep. Someone was trying to scare her to death. She became reluctant and frightened to give details. Over time, the police began to doubt her stories. One night, Agnes dropped by Cindy's house for a visit and knocked on the door. There was no answer, so she assumed she was taking a bath. As she investigated, she came across her outside, crouched down with a nylon stocking tied tightly around her neck. She'd gone out to the garage to get a box, and someone had grabbed her from behind. All she saw were white sneakers. Cindy moved to a new house, painted her car, and changed her last name. She also hired a private investigator, Ozzie Cabin. The police continued their investigation and questioned her several times. Ozzie later reported that she would not tell him the entire story. She would be evasive, would withhold information, and simply would not act normal like a victim would. Her mother, Tilly Hack, thinks the reason for her daughter's reluctance was that her attacker had threatened her sister and family. By naming him, her family would be killed. One night, Ozzie Cabin heard strange sounds coming over two-way's radio that he'd given Cindy and went straight to her house. He went around the house and found that it was locked. Looking through a window, he found her laying on the floor with a parking knife through her hand. She was taken to the hospital where she later recalled being attacked and needle going into her arm. Police never took fingerprints from a suspect, and there was no independent corroboration. Cindy saw this person sometimes accompanied by 1 or 2 others, or sometimes she said there were 2 or 3 people, but police could never find a suspect. The threatening phone calls continued, but they were too short to trace. There were never ones when the police had 24-hour surveillance of her house for days on end with up to 14 officers, but when surveillance was off of her house, another incident would happen. As police came skeptical of the harassment, her parents believed attackers was staying away to make them suspicious of her. Eventually, she was found dazed and semi-unconscious, laying in a ditch 6 miles from her house. She was wearing a man's work boot and glove and suffered from hypothermia. Cuts and bruises covered her body. A black nylon stocking had been tied tightly around her neck. She had no memory of what happened. Agnes Woodcock and her husband, Tom, stayed with her one night, heard noises, and awoke to the basement in flames and the phone dead. Tom left the residence to alert the neighbors. He saw a man at the curb and asked him to call the fire department. Instead, he simply ran off down the street. The police suspected that Cindy had staged the incident. They found no dust or fingerprints disturbed on the outside of the windowsill. The fire was set inside the home. In order to set it, it was thought, the perpetrator would have needed to climb through this specific window. It was also considered odd that Cindy still freely walked her dog during the attacks. Her doctor committed her to a local psychiatric ward, believing she was becoming suicidal. 10 weeks later, she left the hospital. Her father, Otto Hack, said that she finally admitted to her family and friends that she knew more than she was saying and would go after her perpetrator herself. On May 25, 1989, 6 years and 7 months after the first threatening phone call, Cindy disappeared. On the same day, her car was found in the neighborhood parking lot. Inside were groceries and a wrapped gift. There was blood on the driver's side door and items from her wallet under the car. 2 weeks later, her body was found at an abandoned house. It looked like she's been brutally murdered. Her hands and feet were bound together behind her back. A black nylon stock was tied tightly around her neck. Yet, an autopsy revealed that she died from an overdose of morphine and other drugs. Police concluded that she had committed suicide. Otto did not believe she would have been able to stage the scene, but others believed it was possible. In Vancouver, the coroner ruled out her death as not suicide, an accident or a murder. They determined she died of unknown event. Cindy's parents never doubted that her daughter was murdered. Otto believed the police did not investigate the possibility of homicide or of somebody murdering her, instead zeroing in on her trying to prove that she committed suicide. They believe someone in Vancouver is getting away with murder. It is officially ruled as suicide, but the death night of Stammheim still appears weird. Basically, in mid-70s Germany, a group of terrorists was held in a prison specifically built for them, the highest security prison. Keep that in mind. The cells were completely soundproof and there was constant surveillance outside of them, yet the inmates somehow were supposed to have smuggled shotguns inside, then have coordinated the suicide. One of the men supposedly shot himself but had no traces of gunpowder on his hands. Another shot himself with 30 centimeters distance in a way that the bullet exited through his forehead without using a silencer. Yet, the guards heard nothing. He shot himself with the right hand, yet he was left-handed, from that incredibly improbable position. The creepiest thing, though, is a woman survived after being stabbed 4 times in the chest with a dull knife. To this day, she insists she was being attacked, but in the official version, she stabbed herself in the chest 4 times, with a dull prison knife no less, which would have taken an incredible amount of force. A few days before they died, they told their lawyers they were afraid of being killed, after another member of the group committed a highly disputed suicide. That member's brains later turned up in a medical faculty of a university, despite neither her nor children having consented to that, and that, should they found with no suicide notes, it would be murder. There were no notes. During the trials of those people, they had been under constant surveillance and the German government admitted to bugging their cells and even listening in on conversations with their lawyers. Also, worth noting is during both the suicides of the first member and the death night, auxiliary guards were on duty instead of the regular ones, and that there was an unguarded entrance to their tract that the German government claimed to have no acknowledgement of. Despite them building the prison specifically for those people, there was a lot of other stuff too, but this is definitely creepy. That was 9 unexplained mysteries. I hope you enjoyed listening to those goosebump-enabling stories. Make sure you subscribe to Midnight Monster, and you will want to stick around because there's daily stories coming out, from paranormal activity to unexplained murders. We cover it all.